You don't have a productivity problem. You have a clarity problem. You see, everything on this left side of the board here, in terms of the productivity advice, is targeting all of these different things: the behavior, the motivation, the hacks, the routines, the tools, the lists. But the problem with this is that this is all tackling just the behavior. And when you tackle just the behavior, you may get some results, some performance for a little bit. But the problem is that you're putting a band-aid on the overall problem itself, which is ultimately all about your internal operating system, because that is what really is the root source and the root code for everything that you're doing. Because you can have behavior and you can have a little bit of success in terms of changing your habits, your motivation, your discipline. But ultimately, if that internal operating system isn't rewritten with the right type of order and information, then you're going to consistently get the same old results. And so until this changes here, in terms of you stopping and thinking about, hey, I'm just going to continue to do my motivation, my discipline, my hacks that I'm going to learn, and a tip and a trick here in my routines, until you realize that all of this is just going to change your behavior for a short period of time, then you're not going to be able to get the results that you overall want, because it's really all about your identity. And here's the thing: nobody in the productivity space wants you to know and wants to admit that most of the productivity advice that talks about all of this here, the motivation, the hacks, the routines, all of this is useless. Because if you don't have your identity in the right place, and your emotional state and your interpretations, your patterns, your behavior loops, your bandwidth, if you don't understand this side, okay, this is essentially the root system, the root core. These are just kind of like applications and components of the main operating system, okay? And the main operating system, think about this as like Microsoft, Windows, okay? All of these are just applications. So just think about Microsoft Windows. And then we have all of these over here. This would be like a video application, you know, like the video player that comes stock with the Microsoft Windows. That would be like a motivation, for example, in terms of understanding that it's just an application and it's just a piece of the main operating system, which ultimately, really, the main component here is, if you change this, all of these will automatically come into play, and they will help you become this new identity. Versus if you are just trying to do all this stuff here, but you haven't fixed, acknowledged your new identity, or the identity that you want to embody, it doesn't matter. You can do all of this all day long, and you're going to continually get the same old results. You may get a little bit of success, a few weeks, maybe a month, and then you're going to stop, because it's always going to go back to your previous identity, or the current identity that you have, that says that you are not somebody who is naturally disciplined, who needs extra hacks, right? Versus if you embodied an identity that didn't need to do all this stuff here. Now, some of the things are going to be important here. Discipline is important. Routines are important. But the problem with this list here on the side is that people tend to just focus on these things, except changing their identity, which drives this all. So ultimately, this is super important here for you to become aware and acknowledge that this is what's going on. And this is what most of the productivity advice is really centered around. How many videos are on YouTube about 10 different ways to increase your productivity, or, you know, have a Pomodoro effect type of process and system where you like spend an hour and a half working, and then you pause and you take 10 to 15 minutes, and then another hour and a half or so working, and then you pause. Yes, all of those are great, but if your identity isn't there, you can do those all day long and you're going to get the same old results. Now, I want to give you an example here, and we'll call this individual Ryan. And so Ryan, he had tried everything in terms of the productivity advice, the lists, the getting up in the morning, the routines, all of these different things to help him become more productive. So Ryan had tried everything. He had his Notion board set up with the full second brain. He had a morning routine where he would get up every day at 5 a.m. in the morning and work out. He would journal. He would take cold showers. He would have his calendar blocked out. He had read all the books, the Atomic Habits, the One Thing from Gary Keller, and the Deep Work. And then he had a tracking app for all of his habits. He had a very specific app for tracking his time, and then he had another one for project management. Now, here's the interesting thing. Ryan was the most organized, unproductive person that I had ever met, because despite it all, he still couldn't execute. He'd sit down and do the work and he'd feel resistance. He'd plan his work perfectly on the Sunday night. He would outline every single day what he would do, all the hours that he would be working. But the problem is he never executed on it. He had the full system outlined completely from A to Z, but he still felt scattered. He still felt like something was missing. He felt that something was fundamentally broken, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. And I recognize Ryan because I've been there. There have been many times in my career where I've laid out the perfect formula, the perfect routine in terms of I'm going to get up at 5 in the morning. I'm going to do yoga. I'm going to work out. I'm going to check my calendar. I'm going to check my bank accounts. I'm going to check my to-do list, all of these different things. And they were perfectly outlined, but I would find myself taking action and then missing some things and then not following through and then having hesitation, having some resistance. And so even though I knew what I needed to do, it would not allow me to actually continue and progress and move forward because something always just kind of felt off. And I didn't really understand that in terms of why that was happening. And what neither of us never understood is that the system wasn't actually the problem here. Because for Ryan and for myself, we didn't need to look at getting a better system. We needed to look underneath the whole system itself and see what was actually running in terms of our own internal operating system. And so that's what we're getting into today. We're going to go over the internal operating system, how that works, how that functions, and the thing that's underneath everything else that's really the driving force here. And here's why productivity advice just doesn't work. We went over earlier a little bit about the identity, but I want to write this out here and give you an exact understanding of what this is. So all of this is behavior, okay? All of this here. All of this in terms of all of these different things. This is what you're doing here in terms of changing the behavior of what you're doing, okay? This is not the root cause, okay? It's not. Behavior, all of this here, is not the root cause of this problem. The root cause of this problem is identity, and we acknowledge this, right? This is the root cause. The root operating system, Microsoft Windows 11. This is what is needed for the program to be actually running. And most people are just working with the applications. You're working with the video player or, a custom image software, right? You have, think about this. You have like Adobe Photoshop, you have Adobe Illustrator, all of these high-end applications, but they need what to run? They need an actual operating system to run on, right? That's the Windows 11. So this is the system that we want to be running here. Instead of having it just affect our behavior and try to work with that, we start with identity. Then we go to emotional state. Then we go into interpretation. And then we go into behavior patterns. And then this gives us an output. All of this here, essentially what this is. This builds off of each other. Okay? Your bandwidth in terms of you can only do so much throughout the day. And you really want to take note and pay attention to what part of the day are you most productive? Like I know for me, in the mornings around 9 to like 11, I'll have a work window and then take a little bit of a break. And then from like 12 to 2 to 3, and then another window from like 3:30 or so to like 5:30. So sometimes it'll be later than that, but I like to have different windows and look at what is the most productive part of my day where I can really get into the deep work. And that's your bandwidth. But this here is the actual formula in terms of fixing your productivity component and not just getting generic productivity advice about the 10 hacks or the 3 different ways to fix your productivity. Like you don't want any of that until you have this identity locked in. Okay. And you are seeing yourself as somebody who is naturally, inherently, organically productive. And then with that mindset, with that identity perspective, all of this in terms of really the hacks, you don't really need that, but the routines, I think these two, and maybe the tools and the lists. For myself, I use Notion. I use Notion to help with my productivity in terms of knowing what I need to do and then using a simple calendar. So it's very much so straight to the point. Like I don't need all this other stuff. Yes, I have a routine in terms of, when I get up in the morning, what I do, but that's because I have my identity in the right place. And so all of those other things, the behavior aspects, come natural. And one way to get a really good picture of this is like, just think about you having a home and you're wanting to paint your house and you want to paint it yellow. Okay. So you paint the house yellow. It looks amazing outside, right? But what people don't know is that you have a really bad foundation. The foundation is cracking, right? So all of these different issues and problems. And so when you put it out in the market and you want to sell it, people are going to see the beautiful pictures. But once they come inside the house and they start expecting everything, right? And looking around and like, hey, what's going on over here? What's going on over there? Then they really start to uncover the problems. And so that's really how you can think about it. You're just putting on a fresh new paint on a house. It can even be a car that is essentially internally all messed up. Okay, so now what I want to go over is the 4 reasons why productivity fails. So let me go ahead and erase the board here. Okay, so 4 reasons productivity fails. Okay, so there's 4 reasons why the productivity fails, and we're going to go over each one individually. So let's go number 1 here. Identity mismatch. You see, with most people and with Ryan, they're trying to produce activity, behavior, action that isn't in line with your identity. That's where the real issue and tension comes from. You're trying to take action on something that you as an individual, you don't see yourself as someone who does such thing, but you plan in accordance anyways, right? You lay it all out, the routines, the tasks, the board, everything. But when it comes to take action, you feel it, this tension. I don't know if I should do this. Maybe I can push it off. Whatever it may be that you want to convince yourself to not do it because that version of you isn't taking over, isn't the one taking that action. It's that old version of you who's trying to maintain control and protect itself, protect you from feeling, the uneasiness and the uncertainty of doing something that is out of your standard box, right? Out of the norm. Because at the identity level, You see, most people have an identity in terms of the productivity aspect of I'm not consistent. And people don't even realize this. You probably don't even realize this in terms of you doing what you say you're going to do. Think about this and really reflect upon this for a moment. Think about how many times that you actually do exactly what you say you're going to do. Like on the ball, on point, no matter what, regardless of how you feel. Okay. It could be something just as simple as like, you know what? I'm going to take out the garbage every single week at this time, this day. Okay. And how many times you actually follow through and actually do it? Because if you really thought about it, it would probably be less than you actually would like to admit in terms of taking action and following through. Perhaps there's times where you're like, you know what? I'll take it out next week, or I'll do it tomorrow, or this or that, right? Convincing yourself to not do something. Now, this has a lot to do with your will, okay? And how you can fix this in terms of something tactical that you can do to help with this in terms of your identity. Pick a small little minor action. Doesn't need to be huge. Doesn't need to be massive. A simple example of this is the garbage. Say that you're going to take it out every Sunday at X time and do that every single time. Now, if you want something that you can do on a daily basis, think about when your mail comes to your place. Okay. Maybe it comes 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. If you're able to be home by that time, or when you come home, or just whatever time that mail comes and you're able to be home, make it so that you are always, every single day, are going to walk out and grab that mail at a certain time every single day, no matter what. Do that for a few weeks, for a month, and you'll start to notice a lot more things that you actually follow through on, because you're building a repetitive pattern that is convincing yourself, that is saying, hey, you know what? I'm somebody who follows through. And when those small little actions that you're doing on a daily basis with the mail, all of that is compounding, and it's building up votes and energy to then have it where things just become natural to you in terms of following through. You don't have to think about it. It's not any pressure or tension there, because it's just someone and something that you do. You are someone who just takes action and follows through. So then when you write all of these different things, right, in terms of, we had the other side of all the different behavioral actions and items, all of those are going to come consistently for you and naturally, because you're just that type of person at the identity level. Okay. So very, very important. And here's the thing. I mean, you may have the intention of, wanting to do something, right? And like follow through. However, your identity is always going to override that, because your brain isn't going to allow you to act in accordance or in a way that actually contradicts who you actually believe you are, right? So think about it. You are trying to do something, but every time you plan it out and lay it out, there's tension there. Well, your brain isn't going to allow you to consistently and naturally do that if you don't see yourself at the identity level as someone who naturally does that. That's where that tension comes in. And that's where you're always going to feel it, because you don't see yourself as that person. Your brain is going to read that as a threat, and it's going to bring you back to your normal individual identity. And with Ryan, he had the intention of a high performer, but he had the identity of, I'm someone who doesn't follow through. Okay, so let's go to number 2. This is the emotional overload. Okay. And with this, a dysregulated emotional operating system, internal operating system, simply cannot sustain deep focus. And this is super important because when your nervous system is overloaded, stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, it doesn't have the bandwidth to do the work that actually matters. Think about it this way. You can't run a high performance program while system is overheating. Now, the way that you can think about this is like, think of a large software tool or application that has a lot of like space, right? Like it's huge, it's heavy. And this can be like Adobe software, or maybe like a huge video editing platform or software that you're using, application, whatever that may be. You're downloading it into your computer and you're trying to run it, and your system is already overloaded in terms of like, you don't really have a lot of space left on your computer, on your C drive. And so your application is running, but it's like very glitchy. It's slow. Like you're clicking and it's taking like 3 or 4 seconds because the system's overheating. You're going to have to delete a bunch of those files and clear up a lot of that space for that application to run properly and smoothly. And for Ryan, what he would do is he would set like a 90-minute time block for actual work to get done. But if his emotional internal operating system was off in terms of it being overloaded, he would spend 10 to 15 minutes in his head going over a bunch of stuff. Like, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if I don't close this deal? What if, a bunch of different reasons in terms of him just being in his head, going about all these different scenarios instead of actually executing. And so he would spend like maybe 30 to 40% of the time actually working. And then he would, be working, and then he would look down at his phone and be like, man, where did all the time go? And he spent a lot of that time in his own head. And that's not a discipline failure. That's a nervous system failure. Okay, so let's go to reason number 3. This is cognitive noise. So think about this. All the overthinking, all the mental clutter, the self-doubt, the analysis by paralysis, all of that destroys your bandwidth. And bandwidth is the actual resource that productivity runs on. You see, because Ryan had enough time, he just didn't have enough mental clear space. His mind was full of decisions that he hadn't made yet, loops that he didn't close, and doubts that he hadn't resolved. And you cannot produce at a high level with your mental operating system being cluttered. A congested mind is always going to throttle your output. Okay, so let's go with number 4 here. This is the behavior incoherence. And this is very simple. Your actions don't match your identity, and your identity doesn't match your goals, and your goals don't match your values. You have everything pointed in a different direction. It's like you have a map in front of you and it's pointing north, that's where the goal is, but you're going south. And you've spent your energy, your life source, your life force, managing the contradiction instead of building momentum. And that friction, that constant internal drag, it's not laziness, it's incoherence. And no productivity system fixes incoherence. Only OS level work does. Okay, so now I want to go into a different story because I want to give you some examples of how this works. Instead of just me talking about how the system functions, it's better for you to learn through stories. So with this example, we'll go with somebody named Priya. And so Priya, by every external measure, was one of the busiest people that you'd ever meet. She was always moving, always quick to respond, and always in the middle of something. She always had a full calendar and full to-do list. You can think of her just being constantly in motion. But here's the thing. At the end of each week, she had almost nothing to show for it. She'd try to look back and figure out what she actually built or did through that last week. Essentially, she was busy being busy. She was doing a bunch of stuff that on the surface looked like actual productivity of doing stuff, accomplishing things, right? Executing. But in reality, it was just busy work. It wasn't moving the needle. It wasn't progressing, building momentum. And so she would review the week and she would tell herself, man, I just need to work harder. But you see, working harder wasn't going to get her the results and the outcome that she wanted. It was one of those things where I realized, even myself, that I previously was doing a lot of this. I was doing a lot of activity and action. And then I would look back and be like, man, what actually did I do? Like, how can I measure this in terms of I did X actions and got Y result? And the problem with all of this is that it was about clarity. There was no clarity in terms of what she needed to do that then would move the needle to this next step, this next stage, right? Like, if I do X action, I'm going to get Y result. And then I'm here on the Y result, and then I'm going to do A action, and then I'm going to get B result. Like, there was no momentum, like chipping away, right? Like at a sculpture where you could consistently chip away each day. And then by the end of the week, you could see exactly what you had done, right? Through that whole entire work week. But for her and for myself, for Priya, right? It was a matter of just clarity in terms of knowing what exactly needed to get done to move the needle and then actually doing it. And by the way, if you're resonating with this content and if you want to work with me directly one-on-one to upgrade your internal operating system to become the best version of yourself, then click the link below, fill out the application, and we'll see if we're a good fit. And here's the fallacy that keeps people stuck in terms of them doing a bunch of stuff, but not really getting any type of results. Because for most people, the assumption is that I just need to get more motivation. I need more time. I need more discipline. And eventually it'd all click. But that's not the case. For most, it's I need to do more. But that's not it. No bueno. This is not it right here. I don't need to do more. I need to think differently. This is it. We'll put a star here. 2 stars. Instead of I need to do more, because doing more is going to get you more of the same result, which you don't want, you need to think differently. For Priya, her answer was always, I'm just going to continue doing all of this stuff that I've been doing. And then eventually things are just going to fall into place. And I'm going to look back 3 months and be like, man, look at all this progress that I did and I achieved. But the problem with this is that she would always feel like she was behind. Because technically, in a sense, she really was. But it wasn't coming from a lack of effort. It was coming from a misaligned internal operating system. You see, productivity isn't about doing more. Okay? It's about removing the internal friction that's stopping you from doing what matters. So productivity is not about doing more. It's about removing the internal friction. Okay? That's stopping you from doing what matters. And that internal friction is ultimately and consistently centered around identity. You need to see yourself as someone who's actually productive and gets things done, makes things happen, and instead of somebody who is just going to mask, right, put a band-aid on the problem of just doing more, because it needs to start and end with identity. You can do a bunch of stuff, you can keep doing a bunch of more stuff, and you're just going to continue to get the same old results. Okay, so now what I want to go over is the OS method. This is what actually works. So let me go ahead and erase the board here. Okay, so the OS method. This is what actually works. Let's go to step 1, identity upgrade. This is the foundation. Everything else builds upon this. And you want to ask yourself 3 questions. Number 1, who is the person that produces the results that I want? Number 2, what identity would make productivity natural? Number 3, what version of me does this effortlessly? Okay, so who is the person that produces the results that I want? What identity would make productivity natural? What version of me does this effortlessly? So all identity-based questions that you need to really look in the mirror and think about and really ponder in terms of that future version of you, or that version of you that who is super productive and who just makes things happen. What does that look like? How do they think? How do they feel? How do they see things? What is their worldview? What do they do to make sure that they're always productive in terms of when they sit down and designate a time to do something and they actually follow through? They're not in their head. They're not thinking about what could go wrong, this, that. They're just focused and they're making it happen. And here's what I ultimately want you to understand here when we're asking these 3 questions and we're going through this step 1 here. You're not trying to become productive. You're installing the identity of someone who already is. You don't force discipline. You become someone who doesn't need to. Now, let me show you what this step actually produces when you actually apply it versus those who don't. So let me go to the board over here. So we have, let's go right here, person A. Okay. Person A, and then person B. Okay. 2 different people. With person A, they watch this video and this concept and this information really lands with them, like intellectually. They think to themselves that they finally found the solution, that all they need to do is just think of themselves differently, and they actually feel the internal shift. And then later on that night, they write that in their journal, and they ultimately feel like something has changed. And then they go back into their life and they continue to run the same identity, because insight is not installation. The old program is still running. When resistance shows up Monday morning and the same identity script pops back up that says that I'm someone who struggles to execute, then that old identity is going to take over, because the new identity that they're wanting to step into, that new concept, doesn't have the roots to override it. So the old identity takes the wheel. 3 months go by and now they're even more frustrated, because now they know what's the problem. They know what's wrong with them, but they just simply can't fix it. So now let's go to person B. So this person just took it in intellectually. Okay, they understood it all, right? Person B, they take the information and all of what they became aware of in terms of how everything works and their internal operating system, and they actually apply it. They pick one identity statement and it says, I'm someone who takes action and executes on what matters. And then each day they take one identity based micro action consistently every single day. like on a daily basis, whether it's just simply taking a task and executing on it and having it be consistent so that it builds up over time based off of the identity. Like when we think about these questions over here, what is the identity of the person, the version of me that does this effortlessly? They're looking at their life from the worldview of the future identity, and then they're taking action based off of that. And for them, the first week is very uncomfortable because the old identity is pushing back. It's like, hey, whoa, what's going on here? Why are you trying to do this new stuff? These new things that are not in line with what we normally do. In the second week, it gets a little harder. And then in week number 3, things start to shift, not because the old identity disappeared, but because the new one has evidence, real actions, real proof. And 90 days later, they're a completely different person. Same starting point, different identity work, which then led to a different output. Because identity upgrade without identity coded action is just a new story. Because when you take identity coded action, this is how you install it. Okay? Install the new identity, the new internal operating system. Okay, so let's go to number 2. This is the emotional regulation. And I want to say this very, very clearly. Focus is a nervous system skill, not a motivational one. Down regulation, grounding, naming what you're feeling, breath work, emotional awareness. These are not soft skills. They are the foundation of consistent and sustainable output. If your emotional OS is dysregulated, you cannot access deep focus. You cannot sustain creative output. You cannot make clear decisions. Before you build any productivity system, you want to stabilize the system that it runs on. Now, for this specifically in terms of emotional regulation and all of these different things, I love to use breath work. I have mentioned this in a lot of my other different videos, and breath work is a very great strategy for being able to get from being very high up in terms of your emotional spike and bringing it down to baseline. So you want to go in for a few seconds, hold, and then release. And then there's other different tools as well in terms of the naming. So whenever you feel fear, okay, feel it, acknowledge it, step into a third person. Look at fear in terms of the circumstance or the event itself. Don't connect with it. Disassociate yourself from it so that it's not connected to you. It's separate. It's this external thing. And then name it. Realize what it is, why it's there. And that allows you to also regulate your emotions. But I would say the breath work is really, really important because it just calms your nervous system. So let's go to number 3. This is the cognitive simplification. With this, you want to try to have a clear mind, as clear a mind as possible, which is going to help you to become naturally productive. So you want to remove all the mental clutter of thinking about what if this, what if that, all these different things you need to do, the behaviors, the actions, your to-do list, all of that, and focus it more on identity-based thoughts and information that is coming in. Like, instead of the things that you need to do, think about the future version of you from the identity level. What are they doing? What are the things that they're thinking about, processing, analyzing, reviewing, and moving forward with? And with Priya, Her problem wasn't capacity. It was that her mind was essentially running too many open tabs simultaneously. And when you simplify, when you close the tabs that don't need to be open, you get your bandwidth back. Because clarity isn't a feeling, it's a system state. Step number 4, behavior architecture. So with this here, you don't want to focus on the habits, on the hacks, or the routines. You want to focus on the behaviors that are coded to your identity. That's the real difference here. You don't want to focus on all of those applications. Remember, applications that are running, you want to focus on the main operating system to make sure that that is up and running and is functional and it's where it needs to be, so that all these other behaviors are naturally occurring. With the habit, it's something that you do at this time. And with behavior architecture, this is where you're constructing an actual system and an entire infrastructure of your identity that says, I'm someone who treats my time with intention. And then the behavior flows naturally from that identity. You don't need to force it. You don't need a productivity hack or app to help you do this. I mean, yes, if you're very much so wanting to track everything and get very precise, those are helpful. But that's after you have solidified the identity. When your internal operating system is fully aligned, all of these different things come naturally to you. Clarity, momentum, emotional stability, flow state. All of these different things that are part of having a very healthy and solidified identity. Okay? And one here that I will put, that's a big one too, is consistent action without force. Because you're somebody who naturally does all of that because of the identity. This is the version of productivity that nobody tells you and sells you, because you can't sell it as a hack. It's not a tool, it's not a template. It's an internal state that produces external output naturally. Ryan had every system, every app, every routine, and still couldn't execute. And Priya was the busiest person in the room and still had nothing to show for it at the end of the week. And for myself, I spent a lot of time, more than I'd like to admit, doing a lot of this myself and trying to figure out what was the problem here. None of us had a productivity problem. We had an OS problem. Productivity is not about managing your time. It's about managing your operating system. You don't fix it with hacks. You fix it with identity.